is the WHO guidelines in the built environment. I am Wim Bakens, I'm the CIB Secretary General. I will be the convener for this webinar. The objectives of the webinar, as you may have seen in recently published CIB news articles, is to present new WHO guidelines and to explore applicability in and the impact upon the built environment. We do it because, one, it's important in itself to what's happening that might impact upon the built environment. Two, because a CIB commission that collaborates with WHO is working towards a research roadmap on health in the built environment, and the outcome of this symposium or webinar is a relevant impact into such research roadmap. Talk about a 1-hour program with a short introduction by myself and by Bart Mandersloot. We will talk about the webinar, about CIB, and about CIB Task Group 77. Task group of which Bart is the coordinator and that together with WHO is responsible for this webinar. The program 2 main sessions, taking a bit of half an hour. One is on indoor air quality. We'll have an introduction by WHO and a response by an expert on the built environment. And that allows for 10 minutes questions and answers. With the same format is about environmental burden associated with inadequate housing. With 10 minutes questions and answers. On questions and answers, what you do is use the WebEx chat box facility. You see that in the right lower half of your screen. Select a person to send a question to, and that should be me. And I will explore the questions, I will combine them, I will summarize them, I will pose them to one of the panelists or more. So they will not look at the chat box and questions posed directly to them. Address your questions to me. And there has it in there. We do have the time. If you want your name, organization, maybe country to be mentioned, you have to mention them in your question. Now, a very brief introduction on CIB. I've seen from the list of participants or attendees that most are not, or maybe I should say not yet CIB members. What are we? We are about worldwide cooperation on research and innovation for building and construction. Information you want about CIB can be found in the CIB website and in the CIB newsletter. That's part of the website. www.cibworld.nl for the Netherlands. We do bring experts from all over the world together in so-called experts commissions. And we have over 50 of them, all addressing certain aspects of building in the built environment. One of those over 50 commissions is Task Group 77. That's in the built environment. And Bart Mandersloot is the TG77 coordinator. What I'm going to do is, wait a minute, make a presenter so he can give a short introduction about Task 77. And I'm now looking for what are the presenters. You can screen.
Okay.
Yep.
Free now?
Yes.
Okay. Welcome everybody to the 77 work group. I'll go very briefly after Wim already explained the things about the scope of this work group. Your course is to exchange the research and the innovation activities on the health and the built environment, and to make sure that we all have what health and the built environment means. That is that we restrict our scope towards the aspects related to the buildings, i.e. buildings, also the buildings in the environment, because we are think of equal importance. And of course, as nowadays always, for everybody, sustainability and resiliency aspects are becoming more and more important to take into account as well. Otherwise, we do that in very close cooperation with the World Health Organization. The technical guidelines and regulations, you will see a presentation on by the World Health Organization today. Performance and the requirements will be mostly addressed, I think, in the second presentation by Matthias. But also, at the end, we should realize that we are basically talking about the added value in respects of health and economics. Maybe in the discussion we can go into that a little bit further. I think Wim also already mentioned it a little bit, was that we gather share information. We're setting up a SharePoint site for that. We're doing practical elaboration of the guidelines by the World Health Organization. We mentioned we want to harmonize the R&D needed in order to get guidelines and the application guidelines a step further. And the thing we're doing today is setting up conferences like we do today. I think that's basically enough to give what T77 is all about, and I'll try to give you back to Wim.
To stop sharing and then you know how to make me the presenter again?
I'm trying to look for the stop sharing thing.
The green statement on top of your screen. If you go over there with your cursor, you'll find stop sharing. Okay, thank you very much. Short introduction about CIB and about task group 77 on health in the built environment. I'm going to start with the first major session. And I'll do that by use this slide. It's on indoor air quality. The first will be a presentation on the respective WHO guidelines with Dr. Michal Kryzanowki, head of the Bonn office of the World Health Organization, the European Center. There will be a response on behalf of, let's say, the community of experts on building and the built environment by architect Sanjal from India, from the Institute of Technology in Raipur. That's a brief one. Know to all attendees that there is the possibility to pose questions that we will look at and answer in the questions and answer periods. You do that by using the chat box and addressing them to me. Don't wait until we have had the two presentations. The moment you have a question, pose it to me. Let me see. I want to give the ball back to the presenter, which is Michal from the World Health Organization. I don't see his name on the list of panelists. Matthias, is it with you?
We are both sitting at the WHO office under my name.
So I can make the presenter, and the floor is yours, as it were.
This is Michal Kryzanowki from WHO. I will talk about WHO guidelines for indoor air quality, focusing on selected pollutants considered by the guidelines. As some of you may know, the guidelines are one of the creating the health-related guidelines is one of the core activities of WHO. We have guidelines on air quality, on water, drinking water, recreational waters, several sets of guidelines on various chemicals, foods, components, and so on. So it's one of the core activities to create the guidelines. The aim of the guidelines is to provide a uniform basis for the protection of public health from adverse effects of indoor exposure to air pollution, and in a broader sense, to eliminate or reduce to a minimum to those pollutants that are known or are likely to be hazardous. Well, most of you know that the scope of the indoor air quality problems is wide, and addressing, formulating the guidelines is also a quite tricky business. So the first step in creating the indoor air quality guidelines was to ask experts how to approach this very broad subject. And the experts who met back in 2006 advised WHO to look at this problem of indoor air quality and preparation of the guidelines in three broad categories. The first category was to address selected pollutants, specific chemicals or groups of chemicals which are known to be hazardous, which are known to be present in indoor spaces, in residential buildings or offices, and to formulate guidelines for those pollutants. Second group was addressing biological agents, and here the focus was on dampness and mold, addressing, as a matter of fact, the determinant of those biological agents in indoor spaces rather than individual microbes and biological species, which thousands of which are present in indoor air. And second group out of biological agents were allergens from dust, house mites, and pets in particular. The third group of pollutants in indoor air are coming from indoor combustion or from household fuel combustion. And the preparatory meeting advised WHO to address this issue from the perspective of technology used for use of household fuels. And the creation of those guidelines is going on. So the first group of subjects dealing with chemicals was analyzed, prepared, and published in 2010. All 9 pollutants except particulate matter are covered in the specific volume of indoor air quality guidelines, with particulate matter available already in the Air Quality Guidelines Global Update 2005 due to the decision to keep guidelines identical with let's call it ambient air quality guidelines. Guidelines for dampness and mold were published in 2009, and guidelines on indoor combustion of household fuels are being developed now, and we hope to have the guidelines published more or less in a year's time. Specifically, the guidelines on indoor air do not address second-hand smoke. This already more than 10 years ago, it was established by WHO that no safe exposure level exists, and we should emphasize that all those indoor pollutants which are considering are in conditions which where the second-hand smoke is actually eliminated already from indoor spaces. Of guidelines formulation involved a systematic review of literature, the scientific evidence dealing with assessing health effects of indoor air pollutants. Based on this literature, the most relevant studies and data on effects were identified, looking at strength of evidence, at effects on vulnerable populations, and looking at relevance for indoor air exposure. This information was together with information on mechanisms of action of those chemicals and with evidence on current outdoor and indoor levels of those pollutants in the air. Based on this review of evidence, guides were formulated by consensus of the working group gathered in Bonn in 2009, and of the sentences of the guidelines is, and of course the guidelines level, if available, were based on identification of the strengths of evidence, critical health outcomes, existence or non-existence of no observed adverse effects levels, and looking at the mechanisms of the effects. To give an example of a few of the guidelines, for instance, the first one is looking at formaldehyde, and it is well established that formaldehyde is non-genotoxic carcinogen, classified by IARC Group 1, and WHO guidelines, indoor air quality guidelines of 100 micrograms per cubic meter, measured as 30 minutes average, is designed to prevent acute sensory effects. Since this level is lower than any threshold proposed for IARC or an observed level proposed by IARC, this is also preventing risk of cancer. However, when we look at the current levels of formaldehyde in various European countries, we see that the guideline level is not met in substantial part of houses, especially in United Kingdom and in Austria. So there are houses, normal houses, where guidelines are exceeded even in recent days. For benzene represents pollutant for which there is no threshold because it is a genotoxic carcinogen. At each level of exposure, we expect a certain risk to occur, and the guidelines formulate the magnitude of the risk at various concentration or various exposure level. So, for instance, at exposure of 17 micrograms per cubic meter, the long-term exposure is is associated with the risk of 1 per 10,000 of leukemia. When we look again at the distribution of benzene in homes in the world, then we see that the distribution is quite wide, but is only in the range where we can expect more than 1 per 10,000 cases of leukemia being associated with indoor exposure to benzene. Look at the right of the screen, we can see that this level of exposure is very clearly related to existence of tobacco smoke in the house. It's much higher in houses where tobacco smoke is present. So the first to reduce the exposure to benzene is to reduce or eliminate actually exposure to environmental tobacco smoke. Besides the old and well-known levels for relatively short-term exposures preventing accidental poisoning, also create guidelines for long-term exposure, which actually is quite often the level of 7 milligrams per cubic meter is not uncommon in the house and may create more chronic health effects. We considered several other pollutants. The guidelines give both critical outcomes and levels of those pollutants with recommendation that houses should stay below the levels indicated in guidelines. There is further work which is necessary to complete the protection of air from several pollutants. There is a long list of chemicals which were considered as potentially hazardous in indoor air, but back in 2000, conclusion was that the current scientific evidence is still insufficient to give solid basis for indoor air quality guidelines, and therefore this was the work on those pollutants has been postponed for later, and we'll need to look when this later will be. And that is the end of my presentation on the present indoor quality guidelines on selected pollutants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michal. Can you meet the presenter again? And while you do, for the attendees, do know that after this webinar, you will receive an email with a URL that makes accessible to you the recordings of this whole session. So all those terms went through your screen a little bit too fast and you couldn't make your notes. Recordings will be available soon. Now, the CIB Secretariat has been made a host.
Yes, I'm here. Okay. I'm here.
Can you give the ball to Wart Mandersloot, because I do not see our Indian friend, Mr. Sangal. We had discussions with him this morning about responding, but somehow he's not able to log in.
No, he's actually, he sent me an email, he's working on it, so he will just any minute now. But for the time being, I will pass the ball and make Wart Mandersloot a presenter. Okay. Here we go.
But the moment we have Mr. Sangal in, he will take over from Wart. Okay. Wart, you have some general remarks on what all guidelines could have as an impact upon CIB and whether they are applicable in the built environment, not on CIB, but on buildings in the built environment?
Yes, but say from our perspective, but that would be then, of course, not the perspective as coordinator of this working group, but at the perspective of TO, the company I'm working for. But I'll come to that later after Matthias' thoughts. A few remarks to make, because as such the guidelines as presented by Michal, of course, the way the process, well, we cannot do anything else than fully agree with it. It's being a TNO where we are working between versatile research and the applicability of those findings towards both government and industry. How do we translate these results into regulations? Just as an example, I've looked to some principles, how our government people look at these things, and they said, well, okay, we have some principles, and we should, of course, always try minimize at the source. But then in constructing, you've got unavoidable sources anyway. So we should have some product regulation, and I think that the Dutch government is actually following the EU CE marking process in that respect very closely. If you look at our building law, is we actually achieved one law on this thing very recently out of 400 plus different local laws. That people have looked at ventilation requirements because they first the but also the damp avoidance, which is of course very much important. Is that if you look at what's happening here in the countries, then you see big differences between minimum, maximum ventilation requirements set or guidelines between the various countries. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done here in order to come to a proper understanding, say, not within Europe only, but overall, and set some good guidelines out of the findings of the World Health Organization. I had a couple of question marks myself on the PM source because in Holland considers the PM source outside, from the outside world, the most big contribution towards particle matter as an occurrence also house. So I think we should get an agreement and a findings and research on what part coming from the outside, what part is actually produced by the inside, also by in-house combustion, of course. The question I had was I was a bit surprised in the World Health Organization that asbestos was still in group 2. Well, I know it's banned in Europe, banned in Holland anyway, and I think the biggest part of Europe. I know that discussion in the USA. I saw a NIOSH report and a call for a research roadmap on this thing. But that's, if you look at that thing, that's considered basically non-asbestos fibers. And in fact, the analysis and the size of the fibers, because improving methods show us increasing easiness to deter small fibers, which are harmful as well. The thing I'm curious about is how the World Health Organization thinks about all kinds of new materials coming on the market, of nanomaterials, which are slowly getting into norm of life, and we are losing them out of our clothes after washing. What happens with them? Nobody really knows at this moment. So, A, it's for research. B, I'm interested in how the World Organization thinks of tackling these things. Small remarks on this talk.
Thank you very much. The questions are noted. We'll come back to that in the questions and answer time. But we now do have logged in Mr. or Architect Sanyal. If you can the presenter, then he can have his view of the World Health Organization guidelines.
Yes, I will.
With a focus on India. Mr. Sanyal, you have the floor. Can you share your screen and show your PowerPoint presentation?
This is Tom speaking, CIB Secretariat. I think Mr. Sanyal does not have a sound connection yet. Most problems from India for the time being. So
we wait until he comes in and we have a look at that. In the meantime, I have a few questions for Michal. We have questions work post, but incoming questions are, let's call it design. We have a question by Gaio from the University of Wolverhampton of the UK. He said, can design of buildings have an impact on health of occupants or users, as opposed to the use of materials?
Hello.
We talk about floor plan, we talk about form. Can that have an impact, Michal, on health?
Well, if there is time for responding, I do believe that the indoor air quality problems will not be solved without contribution of the designers and building construction, building industry. Well, the designers first of all select the materials from which the building is constructed, and they are also thinking about ventilation. So there are two aspects of indoor air quality which are covered by the designers, and also they think about the methods of heating and methods of cooking in the building. So actually, all of this is included. I mean, both on the side of the emission of pollutants to the indoor air and removal of the pollutants, which will happen. Yes, they do have a lot to do.
Thank you very much. Sanjal, you are still in?
Yeah, I am on.
Now looking at your screen, can you do your presentation with your PowerPoints?
Yes, I am ready. The problem in my country is we have identified many type of indoor air pollution, but nobody, no building regulations actually incorporate this in India. We know about many volatile organic compounds, pollutants in our cement, in flooring and all, but in regulations do not have this content. That means the authorities are not being it enforced by law. It can come up.
I am getting a lot of background noise. What is happening, Mr.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is in brief my PowerPoint presentation. Yeah.
Because I'm hearing nothing but I'm having a problem.
Some problem is there. Your voice is not coming.
We have to stop this, and I'm sorry that you logged in all from India.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Please.
Center. What has happened?
What? You can continue.
Okay.
How can you mute your sound?
Yeah.
Wacht, you posed a couple of questions to Michal from World Health Organization, amongst us about product regulations. Michal, is the World Health Organization somehow involved in, or does it have an opinion about how to regulate products, and especially new materials and new products?
Well, I think in the separation of the work between the health guidelines and regulation of materials, we stay on the side of the health guidelines, providing criteria which could be fulfilled by technology, and letting the others to design or invent methods to achieve those conditions in those spaces. I think one of the examples is the division of work between WHO and other groups dealing with ventilation guidelines, while conditions to be achieved by proper ventilations are defined by WHO, with setting various levels and recommending evidence of, for instance, mold in the houses and dampness in houses. We do not. It's another project coordinated by Paweł Grodzki to develop technical guidelines dealing with ventilation. So I think this will stay, because WHO and WHO experts, I think the expertise is limited to aspects and not necessarily to technologies which we can employ.
Wacht, Mandelslo, my question to you, in fact a question back to you. The Health Organization focuses on defining guidelines and criteria. Then the question becomes how to implement those, or have them implemented now in design and in building regulatory systems. Do you yourself have an idea on how to accomplish that?
The way to accomplish it, and you see that various countries therefore take the various ways to accomplish it. As long as we are remaining in that, because there will be all kind of interests in order to do so. I think it will be very difficult to come to a proper understanding and to get things ahead quite quickly. Because the building industry is already very separated of all the countries, and I think talk about health in general is similar to talking about climate in general. These are things you cannot do on your own in individual countries. So you've got to think about a method in order to harmonize all these systems. And to be honest, I haven't got the answer, but just into or get the discussion going and ideas on it. How can we, from a science point of view, from a reason, commit our lawmakers in order to run.
Excellent. And I think that your commission, your CIB Commission Task Group 77 on Health in the Built Environment, together working with the World Health Organization, can play a platform role in that.
Yeah,
we are facing problems like a country like India that doesn't have anything on indoor issues in its regulatory systems. While at the same time, it's building millions and millions or tens of millions of cheap housing projects in and around the big cities. If all those houses are not adequate, then we are facing future problems of a magnitude we can not even think about. Which
we've done it ourselves with asbestos.
Yeah, it brings me to the second session. If there is inadequate housing, what will be the environmental burden associated with that? We will have a second session with questions, or with a presentation by Matthias Braubach, technical officer at the World Health Organization. Again, Mart will have a short response from the environment, and then we can have the 10 minutes questions. Michal, just a minute. I just received a question on, again from Wolverhampton. So, just a question that ill-developed, ill-constructed, ill-designed houses lead fatalities, actually fatalities, and that data on that. If you have anything in the context about of your presentation on environmental burden, have it in the back of your mind and address that. I'll go back and make Matthias the presenter again. Matthias, your position on environmental burden associated with inadequate housing.
Thank you, Wim. I guess you can see the slides now.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'm going to present as a short summary an overview of the environmental burden of disease associated with inadequate housing. It's a WHO project that we carried out in the recent years, and it will answer to some extent the question just posed about the relation with bad housing and health outcomes and mortality. We know, and this is more than 100 years old, that the connection between health and well-being of the population is one of the most important that exists. This is not only knowledge by Florence Nightingale, but it's, I think, so that most people, architects, engineers, but also people buying or living in houses would agree with. On the other hand, from a more scientific perspective, we do know housing conditions affect health, but there is no common and agreed definition of what is healthy housing. We still face a lot of gaps in knowledge on how actual housing conditions affect health, what exactly is the mechanism, and it's extremely difficult to quantify the health effects because in real life housing you are exposed to many different risk factors at the same time. It also relates to behavioral factors, to social factors. So what's the separate impact of bad housing conditions? Extremely difficult to get of the whole interrelationship of environmental conditions and health. The approach WHO is taking to quantify health impacts is called burden of disease. It is a concept to quantify the amount of health impacts, and this is not done for an individual person, but done on population level. So the burden of disease gives you an assessment for a whole population, a country, or a given area on the impact of a risk factor on health. This concept has been extended to the environmental burden of disease, which then simply represents the burden of disease that is caused by environmental risk factors. And this is a project we have been starting in the Bonn office in 2005. So it took us quite some time, 6 years, to come to a conclusion to assess the environmental burden of disease of inadequate housing. And the report was published in June last year. We have a large report where you can find all the evidence and information, and we have a summary report that puts it in short language and is a little bit more policy relevant. And we have also an Italian translation, and a Slovak one is production at the moment, and we hope to have more in the coming months. There are different chapters in the environmental burden of disease of housing report, and they're assessing the link between a certain housing risk factor. There's always a certain health outcome associated with it. So, for example, we look into a wide range of housing problems like dampness and mold, housing safety in relation to injuries, crowding, cold, transport, noise, so a risk factor coming from the outside, indoor, secondhand smoke inside the house, lead exposure, carbon monoxide, formaldehyde, and indoor smoke from solid fuel use. And again, they are all associated with sometimes similar and sometimes very different outcomes, associated with more health outcomes than we have made an assessment for. Additional chapters look into the housing improvements and what health effects can be achieved by those, and one case study from England tried to quantify the cost of unhealthy housing to the health system. Of the chapters, we have a summary table that summarizes the main information, and it gives you the health assessment. So starting from the top, for example, for the indicator of mold, there may be different studies looking at different indicators of mold presence. So we took these together. This is based on a range of indicators of mold, and look at the health outcome of asthma deaths and childhood asthma in children. summary EBD assessment written short and in very plain language is that about 12% of the new childhood asthma cases in Europe can be attributed to indoor mold exposure. And then we give something we call the DALYs, Disability Adjusted Life Years, which is a measure to not only look at mortality but also the impact of disease on health and quality of life is associated with 83 potentially avoidable deaths per year. So this is the contribution of moldy housing to asthma, and below you see how it has been estimated. What we need to come up with this estimate is the level of the exposure and risk relationship. So, for example, a relative risk of 2.4 means that people exposed have more than double risk of of developed asthma, in this case for children. We have the assessment that about 10% of the European population is exposed to mold, and from there you can develop the assessment of 12% of the total exposed population. And knowing what is the total burden of disease for mold, we can then deduct how much of this is due from the housing exposure to mold. So this then comes up to be 83 deaths and more than 50,000 avoidable DALYs. And of course there are ranges of certainty, so that the range is given in the second column, but the best estimate is provided, and this is what is put forward in the environmental burden of disease report. And you can see for what geographic scope this is available. For some, like mold, we have data for almost whole European region of WHO, and for other, we only have it for very few countries, and you see where the information is coming from. So we try to be transparent on what is the baseline for our assessment. And in the summary, we put together in a table, and I will quickly go through this because otherwise it would take too much time. For the different housing risk factors and exposures, we calculate the environmental burden of these from housing per year. And mold, it would be expressed in per 100,000 population to make it comparable. Be 0.06 deaths 100,000 children in the European region. We would, for example, smoke detectors and injuries. It would be almost 1 death in 1,000 in the all-age European region population. For crowding, it's also almost deaths per 100,000 in relation to tuberculosis. And would have, for example, a very high figure for excess winter mortality, mortality rising in wintertime because of the indoor cold, estimated to be about causing about 13 European cases per 100,000 population based on data for 11 countries. We have 5 death cases per 100,000 from myocardial infarction and heart disease related to traffic noise, more than 2 from cancer due to radon, and more than 7 because in children, I think it was, in to passive smoke exposure. You can go through the different risk factors and see the different data. For example, indoor solid fuel use, not that much on the agenda in European countries, much more in more developing countries, but still leading to one of the highest outcomes with about 60 to 17 death cases. Death cases related to acute lower respiratory infections in children, almost 17 per 100,000 in the European region, and these figures will be higher in many other regions of the world. To point out that it's not recommended to make a summarization of all these individual things because many of these factors are overlapping and they influence each other. Yet, conservative assessment, very conservative, would mean that in total we can assume that inadequate housing accounts for more than 100,000 deaths per year in the European region for the total population, and this is due to a wide range of diseases and health outcomes. In that various, but not necessarily all, interventions have a positive health impact. Some studies don't show this, so it's not that any housing improvement has a positive effect. And the economic cost of inadequate housing, just calculated for England, indicates that the health cost is enormous for 1 year, about 700 million euros per year just for the health system. The report describes a few policy implications, control of new housing and existing housing, and the target groups for action like housing designers and so on. I'll focus very quickly on a few of those. For control of new housing, we make a few recommendations, and these are recommendations that only come from the report. There will be many more recommendations to make, but then these were for risk factors that were not covered by the report, so the real list would be much longer. There's a list of action for housing designers, construction managers, especially regarding education and awareness involving different sectors, and push from the construction sector, pushing for high-level standards and building codes and doing post-occupancy evaluations and checking how people use the buildings and if happy and where the problems are. The one is for research. There is insufficient evidence. We need to evaluate and monitor, especially the impact of housing improvements and the effects on health. And over the conclusions, we assume that making housing healthy, affordable and sustainable should be a prime objective of all professionals and all policymakers involved in any aspect related to housing and health. That includes urban planning, social actors, and a lot of others, but of course the construction industry and construction research. Very much.
Thank you, Jas. An impressive presentation. The data on deaths are scary. Can you make Bart the presenter? So stop sharing and make Bart the presenter so he can give a short response from the thinking, the expertise in building and the built environment.
Okay, passing on to Ward.
To Bart Mandersloot. Yeah. Pass on all almost literally to Bart. Bart is presenter.
Excellent. So you can see this.
Excellent, Bart.
Okay, a quick response from my side.
Still there, Bart?
Yeah, but seems that my laptop is hanging somewhere.
This is no trick to make the whole world look at TNO in very big lettering.
Very big, yeah. Oh, no.
Your laptop froze.
Oh, that
Okay.
works. By word then. We also, again, I say from our point of view, background, an organization like CSIRO and CSI in Australia and in South Africa. Very big organization, 4,000 people. Part of it at the building industry and buildings. Again, what we, from our point of view and perspective, very much look at is how to use all these findings in applicable design rules for not only constructors, but also to get them implemented in the real world. And like Matthias is saying, well, we should try to help the construction industry in order to build nice, big, and good, healthy buildings. Which I fully agree, but certainly in Holland and a large part of Europe, we face an enormous building stock. And how to improve the situation there. And like Matthias already showed, that vast costs and benefits can be made by the health effects there, 700 million he was talking about. Look at investments which need to be done, those needs to be done by the occupants. So we think that research should also very much address its message to the occupants of the existing housing. Like I said, in India and China, a lot of new construction going on, also in the BRIC countries, of course. But in the world where we've got all this data coming from, the question is how to implement those things in the existing stock. So our message basically is try to also in getting message over to the occupants, because if the occupants realize that it will cost them at the end somehow, either in health tax or tax pay they've got to make anyway, or health payments they've got to make anyway, they go to the politicians and get some set. That's the basic thing I would like to give as a response on his presentation. So looking at the way things were tackled in Holland, I had a nice graph which I cannot show you. The way each policy tackles these things, and they tackle things by making graphs themselves, which are the most important factors influencing health, and let's tackle that and forget about the rest. And I don't think that is the right situation, because like Matthias clearly explained, that we fully agree, is that health building is a very complex set of parameters which all intervene. Only turn one thing doesn't help. That's basically my response.
Okay, thank you very much. A lot of emphasis on implementation issues.
Yes.
Can you stop sharing your screen and make me the presenter?
Yes, I will.
I'm going to try for the attendees once more to give a chance to our Indian friend, Ashish Daniel, to give his presentation. But the count level has to that after we have a few first questions to Matthias and Bart. I have seen questions coming in, but I'm intrigued by those big numbers, like the 717 million euros health cost related to inadequate housing. And one wonders what cost magnitude would be of, let's say, properly renovating the existing housing stock. If you do that in a 10-year period, you're inclined to almost think that all the investments in the existing building stock, and taking into account indoor air issues, be that much more than the cost of dealing with fatalities and health issues in general. Would you have any idea on data like that, Matthias?
Difficult question. I think what we would need is really more studies, and we would need to again call for more research on the impact of housing improvements. You would need to have evidence on certain housing improvements and how they change the health outcomes. And with this information, you could do an economic assessment. We're in our office turning a little bit into this direction, and economic assessments are part of our work for the coming years. It's still, I think, easy to say and very difficult to do, because you might either have information on health impacts of housing improvements, but then you need to get to health records and economic assessment data and link it, or you have data on economics, but then you can hardly link it to the housing situation of the different people. So I think it is very difficult. It is something that will take us years to do, because if we want to do it, we have to do it very clean and very carefully, and linking these data sources will be difficult. I'm on the phone to Mr. Kryzanowki for additional comments.
Okay.
Just a sentence. When we know, when the construction industry or the building owners know that there is a major housing improvement project going on, it would be very important to, as with health people, with those who can study health improvements in this in such situation, to gather the relevant data. It's difficult, but it is not impossible in such situation. But after the renovation, after the improvement, it's already too late to assess the improvement of health. So it's opportunity lost if we don't do it together from the very start. Thank you.
I would recommend, thank you Michal, that in our CIB TG77 work we have a discussion on this. And the discussion is both creating evidence for health effects or for impact of properly designed houses on health, and that Matthias called the economic assessment. If we are able to present a convincing picture of impacts of good design and good regulations, costs from health and fatalities to be prevented, we have a basis for a discussion with the decision makers, the project developers, the politicians, the ones who talk about regulatory systems. Then we have the one which is very much via regulation, via also the architect, the decision makers on buildings, and with a very much an emphasis on the building. Almost like a summary. I would like to go back to give one more try to our friend from India.
I am connected. Yeah. Please.
One more try, but we need to do some.
Yeah, basically in India, the problem is that national building code or the construction codes do not have any provision for indoor air pollution. We are bothered about chemical pollution. We are also bothered about biological pollution, because sometimes the microclimate of the housing, that means the housing, if it is in a multi-storied sector, the microclimate also may affect the other inhabitants of the building, and that helps in case that H1N1 and this kind of problem may occur from person to person. So one thing is for sure that India is having huge population. Secondly, huge construction going on. And that really makes it a big problem. There is absolutely.
I have one thing. What can the world do in terms of offering knowledge?
Yeah, actually, that's what I was asking, that what can the world do? What happens that these people sometimes copy, the American concrete code is copied, so they take help from this. So if WHO or the world community come up with a code sort of thing, sort of thing, or regulation sort of thing for construction activities, having some healthy buildings or healthy materials identified, it would be better.
I think that's a challenge to organizations like CIB.
Yeah.
Decades. Then half the world struggling to produce a new building. India, and we now can knowledge to make it available.
Further, agencies are always not having a standard. It means always government is construction. That is not the case in India. There is also people construction. People also make small houses. They are not aware. Urban housing and people living in economically weaker sections, they are aware of this kind of healthy practices.
May I ask you, I find this an excellent intervention and a big challenge to us. Can I ask you to make me the presenter and close off this webinar?
Yeah. Fine. Finally, I would like to call upon more research initiative in this issue, and also we try to approach the financial organization That means the scientific organizations working for this different aspects. We have found that they are not so forthcoming in research and funding to this indoor air pollution aspect. That is a very grim situation. I make some couple of the slides for you. This is the corrective measures I am showing. There is.
That we receive a copy of your PowerPoint presentation, and we will make that accessible to all attendees and the panelists separately by email. We are going to close off. Let me give you a little bit of a summary of my interpretation of a couple of the things we said. I had prepared as a question something like to the three presenters, Michal, Matthias and Wart, what would be your one or two absolute priorities for research? They have answered that question. A lot of research is about materials and buildings. This is emphasizing we need research to, let's say, provide evidence of effects on health from housing or poorly designed housing. We need to be able to make economic assessments. Bart is talking a lot about research in support of implementation via regulations, via architects, and with a focus on the building stock. I think we need to add one more research priority, that is a focus on what we can do with research to prevent the failures we are having here be made all over again in countries like India and China that have a high region. Incredible. I want to close off, ladies and gentlemen, with first thanking all the panelists. I thank you for logging in. I thank you for your presentations, for sharing your knowledge. I want to say that additional questions, and the ones we haven't been able to answer, to the presenters can be asked after the webinar via the CIB Secretariat. You see the Secretariat at CIB World and NL as address. We will send an information soonest to all attendees on how to access the recordings from this webinar. And if you want to forward to other people because you find it interesting enough for them to look at, do so. If you want information on new CIB webinars and regular conferences and publications, including the free downloadable ones, subscribe for free to the CIB monthly newsletter. We will provide you some information on that. Again, I want to thank the panelists. I want to thank the attendees, almost all of whom have stayed until the end, I see, for their presence. We learned from this webinar. We've made it very clear that this is an issue where CIB, or let's say the world research community, has a role to play. Thank you very much. Till the next CIB webinar.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.